Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening, welcome to the show. Kicking off another parliamentary week in Canberra. A lot of headlines, a lot of news around today. Here's what's coming up tonight on the program. A horror weekend for Labor in Queensland as Premier Steven Miles copped a massive backlash that won't just kill him off in October, but risks damaging federal Labor as well. Former Prime Minister Paul Keating has intervened in the Australia-China relationship, confirming he will meet with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi later this week. It looks too like there's more race-based division on its way in Victoria. The Truth-Telling Commission is about to start, and there's talk of multiple treaties across the state. And Labor faces renewed pressure over its self-made immigration detention mess, and true to form, the minister continued to deflect blame.
What we are talking about here arises from a decision of the High Court. A decision, indeed, that we argued strongly against, but one that any government, like any government, we must oblige to follow the law and comply with the orders of the court.
But first, the government's foreign criminals mess, you saw a little bit of it there. A grab out of Question Time today is getting worse by the day. I tell you, as I watch Question Time today, you've got to wonder how on earth Immigration Minister Andrew Giles can survive.
The issue dates back to 2013 and existed for nearly a decade under the former government, who failed to fix it. And worse, they are playing politics as we get on with the job of fixing up the mess. I really do thank the Shadow Minister for this question and for his apparent newfound interest in legal matters. And I would encourage him to be briefed on the real legal issues going to these issues so that he can make a constructive contribution to community safety.
Last Friday, the competent duo of Giles and Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill briefed the media that the High Court was to blame for the likely release of hundreds more foreign criminals into the community. If this was an attempt at a reset and to regain the political narrative, it was an abysmal failure. Ministers blaming others for their problems is never a good look, especially when these two now have a consistent record of inattention to detail, blame shifting and incompetence. In the end, this is a mess entirely of Labor's making. The basic problem is the 50,000 boat people who came to Australia under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, many of whom have exploited the system to remain here on bridging visas while their applications for asylum or appeals against being knocked back have wound themselves endlessly through the courts and tribunals. The regrettable reality is that any foreigner in Australia who applies for asylum, thanks to activist lawyers, lenient judges and numerous avenues of appeal, can stay here almost indefinitely, especially if their home country refuses to accept them as deportees. That's why it's imperative that governments maintain their vigilance against unlawful arrivals by boat and against allowing visitors from places that habitually put in asylum seeker claims. Right now, thanks to Labor's mismanagement, past and present, the scale of the problem is staggering. As the Australian newspaper reported over the weekend, there are currently another 872 foreigners in immigration detention. Awaiting deportation, many of them are criminals. There are some 7,600 failed asylum seekers currently in the community on bridging visas, expected to depart but unlikely to. And there's also a vast 41,000 rejected refugee claims currently before the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, unlikely to be approved, but likely to take many years to be heard and determined. And even if ultimately rejected, these people are unlikely ever to leave Australia. This is the ongoing legacy of Labor's border protection failures. Failures that the current Labor government shows no capacity whatsoever to resolve, mostly because too many Labor MPs don't think that a country like ours has a right to say no. Future court decisions are likely to rule that immigration detention cannot be indefinite because that amounts to punishment effectively by administrative action, which means that we're likely to be stuck with most of the roughly 50,000 asylum seekers currently log-jammed in the system. Now, can you imagine how the people smugglers will be retailing that? Get to Australia, they'll say, by whatever means possible, because the system's so broken it'll bend over backwards to allow you to stay. And if you've got shocking crimes to your name, even better, because Australia won't deport you. And frankly, the system as it stands is broken. The system in Australia and the international conventions, the international law that sit behind it. If the government was fair income, it would conclude, as I have, that the current refugee definition is not fit for purpose. We are being played, and that makes us more vulnerable than ever at being exploited by people who will do whatever it takes to get here and live off our generosity, whether they are truly a refugee or not. I mean, why should someone be able to avoid deportation to a Middle Eastern country simply by claiming to be gay or claiming to have converted to Christianity? As I said more and more today, the whole thing is a racket, and any international convention that facilitates it should not be part of Australian law. Look, those by-election results in Queensland over the weekend spelt big trouble for the Miles state Labor government. And if repeated at a general election later this year, would produce a new coalition government on Australia's mainland. In the seat of Ipswich West, a swing of 17% is likely to return a coalition MP in what was once considered safe Labor territory. And in the seat of Inala, a 20% swing was not enough for Labor to lose, but if repeated, would mean a total wipeout at the state election due in October. The Queensland state Labor government is a regime that really deserves to lose. For bloating the public service, for imposing punitive taxes on mining, for neglecting infrastructure, mismanaging health, and losing control of a youth crime wave. Because the police, well, they've been demoralised, and the judiciary stacked with politically correct appointments, crime has exploded, particularly in places like Townsville, where it looks like a former One Nation candidate has been elected mayor. More than 50,000 criminal offences are being committed in Queensland every month, the highest rate this century, and up roughly a third under the current government. Last year, robbery was up 16%, assault 11%, and unlawful entry or home invasion up 5%. In Queensland, as elsewhere, Labor's essential problem is it's gone from being a working class party to a party of the Green Left. Now, this was highlighted over the weekend by a lament from former ACTU President, former Federal Labor MP Jenny George, in a long article in the Australia newspaper. Now, for some time now, Jenny George has been on a letter-writing campaign bemoaning Labor's surrender to the climate cult and the impact that has on jobs and cost of living for working people. Now, she's explained that she hasn't changed her pro-worker position, but that the Labor Party certainly has. Says Jenny George, "I feel like the party left me. I didn't leave it." Labor governments are now vulnerable right around the country, provided there's a coalition that's strongly in favour of putting jobs at least on a par, if not ahead, of emission cuts, and putting the aspirations of everyday people ahead of inner-city obsessions like identity politics. For too long, the Palaszczuk and then the Miles government's weaknesses were masked by a Labor-light LNP opposition. But not under David Crisafulli, who's promised to end Labor's arrest and release scheme for young offenders and the green lawfare against resource and infrastructure projects, and sort out the paralysis and overspending on Brisbane's Olympics bid. Finally, the centre-right has someone who wants a fight with Labor over the things that matter to ordinary people, not to just be a less worse version of them, but a real alternative. Crisafulli can win, and Dutton can win like him if they find a way for traditional Labor voters to support a coalition team who respects what they do for a living and respects their values. This is where stalwarts like Jenny George are the canary in the coal mine for Labor, and I mean that quite literally. As I said, Parliament's back today in Canberra. Let's go there now for the headlines. Sky News political reporter Olivia Casely.
Good evening. The detainee drama continues as the Coalition questions whether a new wave of asylum seekers could be released following new court challenges. The case of NZYQ, a stateless Rohingyan paedophile who no country wanted to resettle, has sparked key legal questions around immigration detention. In 3 recent cases, the High Court made the point that keeping non-citizens behind bars indefinitely is punitive and therefore should be a decision for the courts and not a minister. From the government's point of view, the law in this area is now unsettled and could create rolling challenges. Another upset could happen as soon as next month when the High Court decides whether an Iranian asylum seeker known as ASF 17 should be released from detention.
The government believes that these individuals, those who are not cooperating with their removal, should be removed from Australia as a priority, and while they are not, they should remain in immigration detention.
The Coalition is demanding answers about whether that'll lead to the release of more people.
Is it possible, is it likely that a further 100 to 150 hardened criminals are likely to be released into the community?
I think Tehan is right on the money. Once again, I don't know whatever happened to this country is that we will decide who's coming inside our borders and who's leaving. I don't know how we've lost control of that.
Family, friends, political leaders and high-ranking defence personnel have gathered for the funeral of Lance Corporal Jack Fitzgibbon. The son of former Labor Defence Minister Joel Fitzgibbon died in a parachuting accident during a Special Forces training exercise. MPs and senators from across the political divide attended the full military funeral in the New South Wales town of Cessnock. He's being remembered for a distinguished decade-long career with the Australian Defence Force.
The nature of a soldier's profession is inherently dangerous and not without risk nor consequence. However, we must take comfort in the fact that Jack died serving his nation.
Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume has labelled the ousting of Anne Ruston by Alex Antic for the South Australian #1 Senate spot a mistake. South Australia's most senior female Liberal, Anne Ruston, was ousted from the top spot in a pre-selection brawl that has split the party. It comes amid a broader debate in the Liberals, with moderates arguing the party will never again regain teal-held seats if it keeps alienating small L Liberal and female voters by ignoring gender concerns.
Personally, I'm disappointed. Anne Ruston is a senior member of the Shadow Cabinet. She's an exceptionally good Shadow Minister. And you know, quite frankly, you know, I think that this was a mistake.
All right, let's get across those headlines and more. Let's bring in now the National Editor for the Australian, Dennis Shanahan. Well, I've got to start yet again, Dennis Shanahan, with his immigration detainee mess. I think they're bleeding on it out there in the real world. It's the stuff that's on the back of Talkback most afternoons, most mornings. It's all the way through the papers. They think it's a bit of an obsession in Canberra of the Conservative side of politics, but not out there in the real world. This is what people are concerned about.
I think people are concerned about this, and they have been for a while. We're heading into almost the 6th month of this crisis, the chaos and confusion over the release of immigration detention detainees, and nothing has changed. The ministers are unable to provide answers. We have seen no remedies, no preventive action being taken from the government, and the same blame being apportioned, saying it's the High Court or it's the Coalition. Oh, it was the Coalition government that didn't change the visa laws when they were in place. The visa laws introduced by the Gillard government. Now, this is just it's so slowing, it's agonising to watch. And yet all we see is once again Andrew Giles talking about his impotence, saying, well, we want to do this and that's what we're going to try and do, but we actually fear it's not going to work. I think that this is an unending problem for the government, and all they can do is leave Giles there every day to take a hit for the team, and in the meantime, the public is becoming increasingly concerned.
Yeah, but the longer they leave Giles there, the more that the Prime Minister's the one who looks impotent, because in the end, he chooses the team he puts on the field. He's given this bloke the big task of dealing with our borders. He's clearly not up to it. As you say, it's been 6 months of incompetence. I know that the Liberals like to call him hapless and hopeless. I think he's criminally incompetent. It's worse than just that. So how does the Prime Minister not see he's got to move this guy out and put a tough nut in there? Or is it about factional numbers inside the Labor Party? I mean, why is he still there?
Well, I think one of the things you have when you have an ongoing problem that is going to go for a few more months yet, if you start to put people in, you burn them up. So what you do is you leave Giles there as a charred memory of political competence, and you wait until it is clear, and then you move him, and he takes all of the problems with him, and the new person comes in untarnished and can actually start a new regime.
Dennis, let me jump in there.
I think that's why
I agree with that. I agree with that as a strategy if you can see the destination point, right? So you know that you've got legislation coming in, or that there'll be a decision in your favour. If you can see the end point, you leave him there, basically the carcass in the tree, until such time as you cut him down. So let him sop it all up. The difficulty is they can't fashion a way through this. They've got an additional, 40 lawyers, or nearly 50 lawyers brought into the Solicitor General's office. They've got additional cases in the High Court. They've got legislation that they haven't even used yet. He couldn't answer questions today about how many of this additional cohort of 300 plus might be people with custodial sentences for some pretty terrible crimes. I can't see how they get out of this. I mean, they need a new bloke or a woman in charge to turn this around. I think they're bleeding on it.
Oh, indeed. But I think for the time being, we'll continue to see Giles bleed.
All right, well, long may that continue if you want to vote for the other side of politics. Talk to me about what we saw in Queensland on the weekend. We had that local council, although it's a very big council for people outside of Brisbane. The Brisbane City Council's huge footprint, unlike other states, and those two by-elections, huge swings there. Adrian Schrinner, of course, the Liberal LNP member, retained as Lord Mayor. But these swings, Anastasia Palaszczuk's seat of Inala, a 30% swing away from Labor. Ipswich West, 18.5% swing to the LNP. What did you make of the weekend, and how much of this might transfer in terms of broader ramifications to federal Labor?
Well, look, you always have to be careful about transferring particularly local government elections and state government elections to federal government. You do see from time to time states voting out one federal coloured government and introducing the opposite colour, Liberal, Labor, Labor, Liberal. So it does happen at times. But I think what the problem for Labor here is the size of these swings. After all, it was a swing in a by-election in a state seat in New South Wales, the seat of Penrith, that actually led to the downfall of Kevin Rudd as the leader of the Labor Party. And I think that these swings are so great in Queensland, which is a key state, where Labor is talking about not only the need but the hope of winning 5 extra seats. I think that this would kill off any of that hope, and it would also make it clear that we're going to see an election next year, because it would be unlikely that after the October election, which will see the defeat of the Queensland government, that Anthony Albanese would want to go to the polls within just a few weeks of that. So I think it is bad news for federal Labor. It certainly makes it tougher for them, but you can't make too much of a state result in a federal election.
No, you're spot on, but you're right to also make the point that when Queensland swings, it swings big. And for the PM to get a second term, he needs to do well in Queensland. So I think the location of these results on the weekend will be what worries Labor. Talk to me about that extraordinary interview by Jenny George in The Australian on the weekend. I mean, she's making it clear she's not a Liberal, or she's not voting for the other side or anything like that. But she is always, she says, a union woman. She still is a union woman. But the Labor Party has left her, and her concern hinges on particularly the climate issue and the way in which renewables and fossil fuels being taken out of regional communities is impacting jobs. Her focus is the worker in these blue-collar roles and a lack of confidence that this nirvana of green jobs in the future will materialise. For Labor people to go public like this is rare. What did you make of it?
Oh, well, look, I'm a great fan of Jenny George. She's a great letter writer in The Australian. And I'm always glad to see one of her letters because she deals with numbers. She analyses things and then she'll say, well, hold on, you're promising 640,000 new jobs as you go to a carbon-free economy, but how many carbon jobs are going to be lost as a result? And then you do the sums and then you talk about the jobs. I think that the most important thing that Jenny George said in that interview in the Australian on the weekend was that the Labor movement, OUR Labor movement, as far as the trade unions are concerned, is a different animal to the Labor Party, OR political party, and that she stands for the workers and the unions, where what she can see are professional politicians, and she was a member of Parliament, of course. What she can see is professional politicians pushing ideology and losing contact with their workers, the real workers, the blue-collar workers, the Labor supporters who have for so long supported Labor through the union movement.
You're right, she's as smart as a whip. Just quickly, Paul Keating has been approached, or I'm not sure the origins of this likely meeting, but it is now confirmed it will go ahead. He will meet, former PM Keating will meet with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Sydney this week. Keating, of course, a staunch critic of AUKUS, actually quite a critic of Penny Wong. She is the Foreign Minister. She will meet with Wang Yi herself. This is a bit unusual. What do you make of it? How troublesome will this be internally for the government?
I think it'll be a great deal of trouble for the government. I think China realises that. China knows how to cause trouble while looking to be, oh, look, we're in Australia and we're working together. And then they'll promote Paul Keating, his anti-government stance on AUKUS, his pro-China stance as far as trade and the region is concerned. And this will actually only encourage China to say, oh, look, you know, and today we've seen the Trade Minister say, oh, look, the US isn't our closest ally. Well, this will only encourage propaganda from China to use to split the Labor Party and to maintain a media presence for Wang Yi in his time here, and then to continue to say, look, you see, the different views. Here's a former Prime Minister saying that, you know, the current Labor Prime Minister's not doing a good enough job. This will be a propaganda coup for the Chinese, and we will see much more of it. It will overshadow, in immediate terms, the visit and what the Foreign Minister is going to do, both Foreign Ministers are going to do on a bilateral stage.
Thank you, Dennis Shanahan. All right, still to come. It's now 3 high-profile defamation actions against Victorian Liberal leader John Pizzuto as he faces renewed pressure from inside the Liberal Party. Plus, the government's incompetence on foreign criminals back in the spotlight. Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan up next. Welcome back. Still ahead, Queensland Opposition Leader David Crisafulli will join me in the wash-up of Labor's disastrous results at the weekend. 2 by-elections. Doesn't look good for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese either. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, let's get to this one. She has finally admitted now what we've known for some time, that the Albanese government has lost control of critical aspects of Australia's migration laws in the wake of that High Court ruling on the foreign criminal we know only as NZQR. By the government's own admission, the legal parameters concerning the indefinite detention of illegal migrants is now so opaque, it's had to enlist another 46 lawyers to deal with it. Add in the legal mess that's there now, it's looking like Australia could have a repeat of the border protection crisis we saw under the Rudd and Gillard governments, as the courts and politicians jostle for control while the community is put at risk with more and more convicted criminals released onto our streets. For more on this, I'm joined now by Shadow Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Dan Tehan. Well, Dan Tehan, I saw you pursue the Minister, Andrew Giles, pretty hotly today in question time. I mean, how serious is this?
It's very serious. We could have another further 100 to 150 hardcore criminals out on the street if the government doesn't get this right. That's according to sources from either the Home Affairs Department or the Attorney General's Department. We know Stephen Donoghue, the government solicitor, said it could be up to 340 hardcore criminals on our streets. So this is a situation that Minister Giles and Prime Minister Albanese should take seriously and should be transparent with the Australian people on, yet they're not. We cannot get a straight answer out of this minister, and the Prime Minister sits there backing him because he's one of his numbers men. It's an absolute disgrace, Peter.
All we've heard since this revelation has come to light late last week is that the government's getting more lawyers in, that the government's reviewing the situation. There's a bit of a blame going on between the government and the courts. If the government's so concerned, if these reports are accurate, and we've no reason to think they're not, why aren't they putting legislation into the parliament to close off or remedy any concerns they have? Why not fix it with a bill this week?
Well, it's a very good question, and if the government's putting 46 lawyers into the Home Affairs Department, what are they doing and what is the Prime Minister doing to make sure that the Minister will be briefed by them? Because, as you know, we're in this mess because the Minister refused to go to 3 key briefings that led to the situation we're in from legal counsel of his own department. There's no guarantees that putting more lawyers in is going to lead to anything. And there is no plan A, there is no plan B. He is a hapless and hopeless minister, and the Australian people are worried and have every right to be concerned. And with the Prime Minister sitting there not taking this issue seriously as well, I don't know, sadly, where this is going to end up. I mean, one of my great fears is that in the end, it's going to lead to one of these hardcore criminals reoffending, and none of us want to see that.
Dan Tehan, I saw you try to ask him today, out of this 300-odd potential criminals being put back out on the street, how many of them have come from prison? I mean, how many of them have been jailed? As we know, there's murderers on the street now, there's pedophiles, there's rapists. How many are that serious in this next tranche of people who could be let out?
Well, I asked Minister Giles that question today because I thought it was important that the Australian people know that. Of course, he refused to answer. And not only wouldn't answer today in the Parliament, but we are still waiting for the updates for the months of January and February on those who they have released and what are the circumstances around that release, how many have ankle bracelets, how many are being monitored in other ways. They just will not be transparent with the Australian people on this. We don't know what states they're in. We don't know whether the number is 149, 151 or now even greater, because the government will not confirm any of this, even though they did it before and now they're saying, well, we'll just do it when we see fit. It's just simply not good enough when your number one priority as a government is to keep the Australian people safe.
Dan Tehan, I was staggered to learn on Friday this point you're just making there about the monitoring and the surveillance. We learned on Friday from the AFP Chief Commissioner the cost of this to monitor the 149 criminals out on the street. It's $255 million. I mean, are you confident with that money we're being kept safe?
No, I'm not, because until Minister Giles goes, you've got a hapless and hopeless minister in control of this. And the Australian people can have no confidence that they're being kept safe with this minister in control. And that figure of $250 million is likely to get bigger because, as we now know from this secret briefing they held with journalists on Friday, it seems that that number could grow by at least an additional 100 to 150 hardcore criminals. And that bill will keep getting bigger, like this mess keeps getting bigger under this government.
Oh, well, add this in as well. I mean, we know that the minister's currently involved in some 17,000 legal cases involving illegal arrivals. There's another 41,000 cases before the Admin Appeals Tribunal. So not only have we got the cost of surveillance, but we've also got all of these costs, Dan. I mean, this is extraordinary. This is costing taxpayers, I don't know, have you got any idea of what the grossed up amount is?
Well, we don't because, once again, they're not transparent with the number, but it would be billions of dollars. There is no question about it. And the problem is we're going to see more and more of these legal appeals, this legal approach, because they know now that the government is vulnerable because they don't know how to handle them. We know that when it came to NZYQ, the statement of facts dating back to April last year, the government agreed with a statement of facts which said, oh no, we can't deport these people, which led to the whole mess we're in. So if you've got incompetence at that scale, why wouldn't you challenge, if you're a detainee here, this government? Because you know through their incompetence, sadly, you're likely to win.
Look, before we go, I want to ask you just briefly on another decision dropped out also on Friday. This is by Penny Wong, reinstating the $6 million of annual funding to the UN pro-Palestinian body, the relief agency UNRWA. Now, it was paused because there were credible allegations that staff within UNRWA had links to the October 7 attack on Israel. Now, this investigation is still ongoing. If it is ongoing, why on earth has Australia resumed funding a body with such a cloud over the organisation?
It's a terrible decision, Peter, and I can't understand it. I've just got back from Israel. I spent 3 days on the ground there. The Israeli government showed us footage of UNRWA officials involved in those heinous attacks on 7 October. There is ongoing investigations and none of those have been conclusively finalised. So for us to move ahead of the US and take this decision beggars belief. It's not the way that we should hand over Australian taxpayers' money. The idea that it could be going back to people who are Hamas supporters and could have been involved in those attacks on the 7th of October is a crying shame. And the government should reverse this decision and reverse it right here today.
Dan Tehan, thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Let's head now to Victoria, where the names of the donors helping fund opposition leader John Pizzuto's legal defence against defamation proceedings have this afternoon been made public. Mr Pizzuto's facing 3 defamation cases from high-profile women relating to comments he made following the Let Women Speak rally last year. Here's Sky News political reporter Simon Love with the latest.
Good evening, Peter. After a fortnight of pressure, John Pizzuto has released his returns to Parliament, which outline the 12 donors to his legal defence fund. Now, this not only involves now the legal challenge that Moira Deeming had lodged earlier this year, but it also involves 2 further defamation lawsuits, which Sky News have been told were due to be filed by close of business on Monday afternoon. Now, the donors have been confirmed as 3 former Liberal Victorian state premiers, Jeff Kennett, Dennis Napthine, and as well Ted Baillieu. Also on this list is the former Victorian State Liberal Party director John Ridley, as well Liberal member Judith Snowgrass. There have also been a number of listed companies that have been on this list of 12 people or entities that have donated to John Pizzuto. Now, as part of this list, we do not know the exact amounts that have been donated. It is not required under Victorian Parliament rules for that to be revealed. Of course, this was going to be revealed later in the week by the Clerk of Parliament, but John Prosciutto was under pressure to reveal this. And it comes after a day of pressure from within after those two further defamation actions were filed, including one from Angie Jones and that from Kelly J. Keane.
It should be career-ending to say somebody is associated with Nazis. I think it should have really sort of drastic consequences for him. And if this is what he's done to himself, then I guess he'll have plenty of time to consider whether it was a good idea after all.
Those within Shadow Cabinet have told me today that the party needs to remain united. It's my understanding at this stage that John Prosciutto will not face a spill motion when the party room meets on Tuesday morning. However, in politics, anything can happen.
Not good. Well, let's go to Queensland, though, because they have some good news coming there for the Conservative side of politics. We'll speak with Opposition Leader David Crisafulli after the break. Plus, faith-based schools warn proposed hiring changes could threaten their religious freedom and your choice as a parent. Coming up, Federal Labor's gas plan likely to hit your gas bill. We'll get into that and the latest on the Victorian Treaty's precedent likely to flow to other Labor states. But before that, let's move to that horror weekend for Labor in the Sunshine State, where the Miles government's in serious trouble after massive swings towards the LNP in two by-elections held over the weekend. Ipswich West, the LNP picked up the seat thanks to a huge 18.5% swing away from Labor, while Steven Miles hangs on to Anastasia Palaszczuk's former seat of Inala. First preference votes there, 30% swing. I don't think I've ever seen it that big. He's surviving, but only just. What's going to happen? Well, interestingly, Steven Miles went on the attack. Have a listen.
Holding on to particularly Ipswich West was always going to be very hard. I said that. These results are clearly very bad. I was expecting a bad result, and they're even worse than that. Clearly, they wanted to send us a message that we need to work harder, particularly on cost of living and on community safety.
Joining me now, Queensland Opposition Leader David Crisafulli. Well, David, I'll get into what this vote means, what voters are saying to you, because I know you're out on the hustings throughout this campaign. But the Premier today reckons you're pretty cocky after the weekend. Are you cocky?
Peter, we remain the underdog, and history shows that. We've got a massive task ahead, and results in by-elections don't just translate to a general election, I can assure you. So we remain focused on a really big task ahead. Now, I never play the personality politics. If he wants to be infantile and do that, over to him. But let me make this point. He also said that somehow that we've tried to sensationalise youth crime. Tell that to the victims. Tell that to the people who've lost loved ones. It just shows that despite saying that they have got the message, it's the same playbook. Blame everybody else, try to deflect, try to distract. We're focused on the task at hand, and the result shows that Queenslanders want better, they deserve better, and we're focused on the issues at hand.
When you get a swing of 30%, when you're getting 18% swings even, this is Labor people deserting Labor. So what are voters saying to you is driving their vote away from Steven Miles?
Well, we ask Queenslanders to send them a message on youth crime, health, housing and cost of living. And in all four of those, Queensland is ground zero when it comes to the crisis in this nation. We asked them to send a message, and they did so. Now, the message is they don't trust this government to fix the problems. They created the problems, in many cases by doing things like watering down the laws. So they created it, and Queenslanders don't trust them to fix it. Now, the message to us is keep going. Keep focusing on these issues, keep putting forward solutions, and that's what we're going to keep doing, Peter. It's important. We're still a little over half a year away from a general election. It is a big task ahead. We remain the underdogs. We need over a dozen seats to win. So it is a big task, but we're united, we're focused, we're hungry, we're disciplined, and we want to serve Queensland and bring real change.
October's not that far away, though. I mean, Are you confident if you get the trust of Queensland voters, you can hit the ground running and get done quickly what needs to be done to turn the state around?
We are, Peter, and I'm a big believer in you set targets and you hold people accountable, and that's not happening in Queensland at the moment. I've said across the board in every one of the crises, we've identified the problems, but we've also put forward the solutions. And let me tell you, within 100 days of the election, Queenslanders will see in real time what is happening in their hospitals. Doctors and nurses are going to be put back in charge immediately. When it comes to the youth crime crisis, we are going to rewrite the Youth Justice Act this year. We're going to remove the provision that says detention has to be a last resort. Power prices, Queensland's had the biggest rise in the last 12 months, 19.9%. That's 3 times the national average. Well, we're going to implement a maintenance guarantee to keep the lights on in this state. It's been over 1,000 days since the Callide coal-fired power plant went boom, and the government hasn't said why, and it doesn't say when it's going to bring it back on. We're committed to a maintenance guarantee. And when it comes to housing, I'm determined to make sure that targets are set to deliver infrastructure to get young people in the market. At the moment, in Queensland, our home ownership rate is 64%. That is the lowest in the country. Now, I'm not comfortable with that, and we have a plan within a decade to go from last to first. And I'm also going to hold ministers accountable when it comes to community and social housing for the most vulnerable as well.
Right, what do you make of these reports? There was a polling booth at Springfield Lakes. We're told it closed half an hour early. There were claims that the gates were shut at 5:30, only opened again 15 minutes later, just before 6 o'clock, after multiple complaints. An Electoral Commission spokesman said, well, the gates really weren't shut, but the queue had already been cut off early. Given we rely on the Electoral Commission for integrity in our voting system, are you concerned by this?
Queenslanders were expressing their frustrations, Peter, on a number of fronts, and one of them was the length and time of those queues. In a democracy, you've got to encourage people in every way, shape and form to vote, and part of that involves easy access to voting. You also need transparency and accountability and integrity in the way the vote unfolds. And let me tell you what was happening on polling booths on the weekend. Australian Workers' Union representatives were dressed in legalised cannabis shirts and were masquerading as another political party to harvest votes back to the Labor Party against the wishes of that party. Now, that is a very, very dark day for democracy. Now, we've raised the questions and we're not getting the straight answers. But I repeat, this is a big deal. And in a democracy, there is no way that people can masquerade as others. And the Labor government are up to their eyeballs in this, and we're not going to let them go.
David Christophilly, thank you. I might add there, that's a bit of a tactic that was used by Daniel Andrews in times that he won. Interesting there, this is a bit of political craft for you. To see when I asked him that question about, how would you turn this state around? October's not far away. Problem, solution. Problem, solution. Too many people in opposition just have a rhetorical response. I just tell you what's wrong and tell you how they're going to fix it. People want to vote for change. All right, after break, the New South Wales region where 70% of people charged with crimes in the past year are juveniles. Plus, truth-telling and treaty-making starts soon in Victoria. It'll be precedent right around Australia. That's coming up. Welcome back. Panels are here with me now. Keith Pitt, current MP, of course, in Canberra, and Howard Government Minister, former Minister there, Gary Hargrave. Gents, welcome. Gary, I'm going to start with you. The chair of Victoria's truth-telling process, the Yuruk Justice Commission, they're suggesting multiple treaties could be formed across the state. They're doing a final round of hearings at the moment. They're also tasked with setting up an official record of how colonisation has impacted Victoria's Indigenous population. Now, what concerns me most here, Gary, is that we risk rewriting history based on what? I mean, no one alive can truthfully give evidence about what might or might not have happened in the colony of Victoria some 200 years ago.
Yeah, look, I spent a couple of years on Norfolk Island, and on that place they have a thing called Dem tell me this and Dem tell me that, right? Chinese whispers. And I suspect a lot of what you're seeing here now is the grievance industry trying to industrialise that kind of Chinese whispers thing. My auntie told me that Uncle Billy and all this, and off it goes. And look, it's taxpayers' money, but the serious part about this, Peter, is the creation of these enormous schisms, these divisions in our country at a time when we need national unity, the things we've got in common. The left just want to keep dividing us, just keep on chunking us into little groups and splitting those groups down, even further. And this is just simply about them having a good time at our expense, but destroying the fabric of society that holds us together. This is serious stuff, and you're right, it's going to be a template for every one of these state Labor governments because they love division. The left love division, whereas most of us want diversity. We want to find the stuff we've got in common and just all get on with our lives. But no, not these folks. They want to revisit stuff they were told they think, possibly, maybe.
Yeah, it's terrible. I want to get that right, though. It's the colony of Port Phillip, Peter Credlin, not the state of Victoria. Sorry, it is the state of Victoria, not the colony of Victoria. Can you tell me, Keith, this gas talk out of Canberra, the PRRT, you and I know what that acronym stands for, but this will end up on our gas bills, won't it? Are you going to fold? Are you going to roll over with Labor?
Well, the petroleum resource rent tax, Peter, it's about two things for the Labor Party. $2.4 billion over the forwards in extra taxes that they put in the bank and can spend on whatever it is that they want to do, and trying to show the Greens voters just how tough they are on the offshore oil and gas sector. And for us, there's some recent media reports today that we haven't come to a position, but I'm pretty straightforward. I stand for lower taxes. That's always been my position. And let's look at what Labor is doing to offshore oil and gas. You have the safeguard mechanism, which is going to increase costs. We now have the Nature Positive, which is Australia Negative plan, which is going to have potentially green anarchists with badges and a rule book, plus federal heritage laws and all the other things that kill off projects in a heartbeat. We've seen increases across the board in IR costs, all of the additional problems that we're seeing with the Labor government. No matter which way industry looks, it is more difficult and more costly for them to be in this country. So guess what? They'll simply go and invest somewhere else because they can. And that is bad for our nation. It's bad for jobs. It's bad for all the things that we need to actually pay for. We need taxes from a strong resources sector.
Yeah.
What about the continuing concern, Gary, about faith-based schools warning that religious freedom's under threat, concerns that they could lose the ability to hire staff who share their values?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely critical if you're going to go to a faith-based school that you're sure, and maybe a bit more sure than you are at a government-run school, about exactly the calibre of the people that are in the schoolroom. And look, I get it. If you want to be a school, you've got to teach certain things, but it's the people we're talking about. And this interference, this wiping out a religion, this wiping out values, this wiping out beliefs, so the only thing you believe in is what the state tells you to believe in. It is a nasty march by the left through the lives of everyday Australians. And we've got to save Australia one family at a time. So if your family's at a faith-based school, you want to be sure about them actually teaching the stuff you need them to teach. But I got to tell you, a lot of them are making kids feel bad, making kids feel as though they're somehow or other responsible for things that may or may not have happened 200 years ago. They're all being infected by this rubbish, but it's government trying to knock us off our values, Peter, and this is wrong. Wrong.
Keith, we know crime's bad up your way in Queensland. We know it's pretty bad down in Victoria as well. We find out today in the New South Wales town of Moree they've had to send in riot police because since September there's been well over 150 people charged with crimes. 70% of them are juveniles. Like, what's going wrong?
It's pretty straightforward, Peter. They're taking actions that have no consequences. They're breaking the laws without consequence. They're committing crimes without consequence. And they keep getting away with it, so they keep escalating. And we keep seeing things on Facebook and social media. They keep beating one another up, looking for the next thrill for themselves. And guess what? People are getting killed. They're losing their equipment, the things that they've paid for. They're scared in their own houses. Good on New South Wales for sending in the police force, and I hope there's more of it.
Gents, thank you. I'll leave it there. Keith and Gary, see you next week. Common sense there, isn't it? That's it for me. See you tomorrow night at 6. Here's Andrew.